3:17 a.m. inside St. Matthew's Sleep Research Center. The building hums with a low mechanical rhythm, the sound of ventilation systems, the gentle whir of monitors, and the distant echo of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Dr. Michael Reynolds, a man whose career has been built on patterns and predictability, walks down the corridor toward the observation room. He remembers it clearly. The night medicine stopped making sense. The sleep lab feels colder than usual, its silence punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors. On the other side of the glass, his patient, Emma Clark, lies perfectly still beneath a thin white blanket. Electrodes trace across her scalp like a constellation, tiny lights blinking in synchrony with her brain. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and coffee. The scent of sleepless nights. Emma had come in for what should have been a routine sleep study. 34 years old. No significant medical history. Months of relentless insomnia and vivid dreams had left her drained, fragile, and desperate for rest. Dr. Reynolds had seen hundreds of patients like her, people trapped between exhaustion and fear. But there was something different about Emma. Her eyes, when she first met his, seemed to carry a quiet dread, as if she already knew that sleep was no longer a safe place to go. That night, as the clock pushed past 3 a.m., everything appeared normal. Her brainwaves shifted through the expected stages, light sleep, then deeper, slower patterns, until she entered REM. Her breathing steadied, her pulse slowed. The monitors displayed the tranquil dance of a body surrendering to rest, and then, without warning, the data changed. The EEG screen began to flicker. The pattern flattened, then fractured. The smooth waves replaced by jagged chaos. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, adjusting the settings. Her heart rate dropped, first to 40, then to 30, then lower. "Emma?" he called softly through the intercom. No response. The air grew heavy. Her brain activity began to collapse in real time. The REM waves disappearing until the screen showed only silence. Zero neural activity. Zero. But her chest still rose and fell, steady as if she were only dreaming. For a moment, no one moved. Then, suddenly, Emma's body sat upright. Her eyes opened, vacant, unblinking. The monitors screamed, flatlined tones slicing through the room. No heartbeat, no electrical activity. And yet she was awake. Dr. Reynolds remembers the panic, the confusion, the disbelief that froze everyone in place. The nurse shouted for a crash cart, her voice trembling. He watched as Emma's gaze locked on something unseen, lips parting as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came out. For 7 minutes, she remained in that impossible state, neither alive nor gone. The monitors insisted she was dead, yet her body refused to let go, and then, just as abruptly as it began, it ended. A single gasp tore through the silence. Her heart resumed its rhythm. The EEG monitor flickered back to life. When she finally opened her eyes again, she looked at Dr. Reynolds and whispered almost inaudibly, "I saw you watching me, but I wasn't here." He says that sentence still echoes in his mind years later. As the screen fades to black, his voice returns, steady, quiet, haunted. In my 18 years as a physician, I've seen medical anomalies, sleepwalking, parasomnias, even comas that defied recovery. But that night, Emma's body broke every rule of biology I knew. For 7 minutes, she was dead, and yet somehow still aware. That was the moment I realized the line between sleep and death might be thinner than any of us want to believe. Before the night that shattered medical logic, there was just Emma Clark, a young woman trying to understand why her own mind had turned against her. To Dr. Reynolds, she would later become a symbol of the inexplicable. But to those who loved her, Emma was simply Emma, warm, vibrant, and endlessly curious. Her husband, Daniel, remembers her laugh first. It was the kind of laugh that filled a room, he says softly. But that laugh, it started fading about a year before everything happened. He recalls the gradual change, how her energy dimmed, how she stopped painting, how she began avoiding sleep. She'd sit on the couch at 2 a.m, staring at nothing. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd just say, "I can't let it happen again." Her sister Megan adds that Emma's nights had become battlegrounds. She'd call me crying, saying she couldn't tell what was real. She said she'd wake up in her body but couldn't move, that she'd hear people talking, see shadows moving around her. She thought she was losing her mind. At first, doctors labeled it anxiety-induced insomnia. Others suggested depression, parasomnia, or even night terrors. She was prescribed sleep aids, antidepressants, even mild antipsychotics, but nothing touched it. Instead, her symptoms worsened. Emma began to experience blackouts, moments in which she'd suddenly lose awareness, only to come to hours later in unfamiliar places. The bathtub half full of water, the front door left open, the oven on. When Dr. Reynolds first met her, he was struck by her exhaustion, not just physical, but spiritual. She looked like someone who hadn't rested in years, he recalls. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, always darting to the corners of the room as if she were watching for something none of us could see. During their first consultation, Emma struggled to describe her fear. She said it wasn't just the nightmares. It was the feeling that something waited for her when she slept. "Every time I close my eyes," she told him, "I can feel myself slipping away. Like my body's here, but I'm not." Dr. Reynolds listened, taking careful notes, trying to match her symptoms to a diagnosis. Sleep paralysis, he thought at first. The inability to move during the REM stage, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. But something didn't fit. Her EEG readings from previous studies were erratic, showing bursts of unusual brainwave patterns inconsistent with known parasomnias. But when he suggested another overnight sleep study, Emma hesitated. "What if I don't come back?" she asked him, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled gently, reassuring her that the study was completely safe. But deep down, something about the question lingered. Later, reviewing her intake forms, Dr. Reynolds paused at one of Emma's written notes. In the space marked, "Describe your main concern," she had written just 6 words. "I die a little every night." He would remember those words forever. "At first," he says now, his voice thick with regret, "I thought she was describing sleep paralysis, something I'd seen hundreds of times before. But this wasn't paralysis. It was something else, something I couldn't name." Dr. Michael Reynolds still remembers every second of that night. The hum of the machines, the cold glow of the monitors, the sterile stillness before the storm. It began like every other sleep study he'd conducted over the years, routine, controlled, predictable. Emma arrived at 8:45 p.m., pale but composed. Her husband Daniel helped her check in, lingering longer than most spouses do, as though he already sensed something wasn't right. "You'll be okay," he told her softly, brushing her hair from her face. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed the truth, a quiet, terrified resignation. In the prep room, technicians attached electrodes to her scalp and temples, chest leads to monitor cardiac rhythm, and sensors along her legs to detect micro-movements. Each wire connected her to a world of numbers and graphs, a digital map of her consciousness. She joked lightly, saying she looked like a science experiment with bad hair. Dr. Reynolds smiled, though his mind remained fixed on the anomalies from her prior tests. By 11:30, she lay in the lab's narrow bed, wrapped in a thin blanket. A camera in the corner began recording, capturing every breath, every twitch, every flicker of her eyelids. Behind the glass, Dr. Reynolds and 2 technicians watched the monitors flicker to life. Stage 1, drowsiness. Her brainwaves slowed into calm, rolling alpha rhythms. Stage 2, deeper relaxation. Her heart rate dipped, body temperature dropped. Stage 3, deep sleep. Slow delta waves began to dominate. Everything looked ordinary, until it didn't. At 2:47 a.m., her EEG began showing activity that didn't belong. Sharp bursts of beta waves, high-frequency patterns usually seen during wakefulness, spiked amid deep sleep signals. "That's strange," one technician murmured. Dr. Reynolds leaned in, eyes narrowing. Then the irregularities grew stronger. The monitors began contradicting one another. Her brain activity was consistent with REM sleep, yet her eyes weren't moving and her muscles weren't paralyzed as they should have been. He scribbled notes. Possible data corruption. Check connections. He turned to adjust the equipment. And that's when the sound changed. The heart monitor, once steady, began to slow, first gradually, then sharply. 80 beats per minute, 60, 40, 20, until nothing. The room filled with the high, flat tone that every doctor dreads. Dr. Reynolds froze. The EEG dropped to 0. No heartbeat. No respiration pattern. And yet, her body remained motionless, as though she were still dreaming peacefully. "Emma?" he called into the intercom. No response. The nurse rushed in. They checked her pulse, her pupils. Nothing. She was clinically dead. "Start compressions," Reynolds ordered. The nurse moved into action, adrenaline overtaking confusion. But before they could begin CPR, something stopped them. Emma's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, but undeniably awake. She sat upright slowly, with the stiff, unnatural motion of someone being pulled by invisible strings. Her lips moved, soundlessly, as the monitors continued to scream their digital alarm. Dr. Reynolds stood frozen, transfixed. "She's moving," the nurse whispered. "I see it," he replied, barely breathing the words. For 7 minutes, Emma remained in that impossible liminal state. The EEG showed a flat line. Her heart produced no measurable rhythm. Yet the camera recorded her body making small, deliberate movements, her hand rising to her chest, her mouth forming words. Later, when they reviewed the footage, they saw her lips shape one phrase again and again, "Don't let me go." Then, without warning, she collapsed backward. The monitors flickered, then spiked. Her heart rate jumped to 60. Brain activity surged back to life. She inhaled sharply, the sound of someone gasping after being underwater far too long. The team stood in stunned silence. Reynolds' hands trembled as he leaned over her. "Emma, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened once more. This time, she looked directly at him, aware, calm, even gentle. "I saw you watching me," she whispered, "but I wasn't here." No one spoke for several seconds. The room was thick with disbelief, as if reality itself had briefly split apart. Dr. Reynolds later described it as the single most haunting moment of his career. Her EEG showed zero activity, he explains in the documentary. She was dead, not metaphorically, not emotionally, but clinically. And yet, when she woke, she described details of what had happened around her. She knew what we'd said. She even knew that one of the nurses had dropped a pen. He pauses, looking down, struggling to put words to what he still cannot explain. I've studied sleep my entire life. I can tell you when the mind dreams, when it repairs itself, when it shuts down, but I can't tell you how someone can die and still be aware. That night, the video footage and data logs were archived, sealed as evidence for later analysis. But for Dr. Reynolds, the haunting had already begun. In the days following the impossible night, Dr. Reynolds became a man possessed by data. He barely slept, replaying the footage over and over, looking for any clue that could explain what had happened to Emma Clark. Each time, he hoped to find a glitch, a mechanical fault, anything that would tether the event back to science. But the more he analyzed, the less sense it made. The EEG cables had been checked, recalibrated, and tested. No faults. The heart monitor had been replaced and verified by the biomedical team. Even the backup sensors told the same story. Zero brain activity, zero cardiac rhythm, yet unmistakable signs of movement and awareness. Dr. Reynolds did what any rational physician would do. He reached out to experts. Within a week, he sent the full case file to neurologists at Johns Hopkins and Stanford, requesting urgent analysis. The responses were swift but cautious. One senior neurologist called it a clear equipment anomaly. Another suggested the data might have captured undetected microcurrents or a rare form of cataplexy, a sudden loss of muscle control triggered by REM state misfires. Yet none of these explanations accounted for the complete flatline or her conscious recollection afterward. And then there was Emma herself. When she finally returned to the clinic for a follow-up, she appeared different, calm, almost serene. Her color was better, her voice steady, but there was something in her eyes, a stillness that unsettled everyone in the room. Dr. Reynolds asked what she remembered. She hesitated, her gaze unfocused. "I remember floating," she said softly. "Like I was watching you from above. I saw the monitors, the nurse crying, the light from the hallway. But I wasn't scared, I felt free." He asked if she could recall anything else. Any sounds, sensations? She nodded. "I heard you say, 'She's gone.' But I wanted to tell you I wasn't. I could see everything, feel everything. It was like I existed outside of myself." Her words left the room in silence. One of the technicians, a devout skeptic, whispered, "That's impossible." Dr. Reynolds later admitted, "Every instinct in me wanted to dismiss it. But the details she described, the sequence of alarms, the pen falling, even the timestamp on the monitor, it all matched the recording exactly. Medical journals had documented near-death experiences before, but none like this. Not during a controlled, monitored sleep study. Not with this kind of verifiable data. Reenactments show the doctor sitting alone in his office, blinds drawn, a single lamp illuminating stacks of medical reports. His narration is quiet, weary. I kept thinking maybe consciousness doesn't stop when the brain stops. Maybe it just changes form. But that's not science. That's faith. And I wasn't ready to believe in faith. As the camera lingers on the oscillating glow of the EEG screens, his voice fades into a single haunting line. If her brain was truly offline, these memories shouldn't exist. But they do, and that's what still keeps me awake at night. For weeks after the incident, Emma's condition shifted between fragile recovery and inexplicable decline. What once seemed like a singular event began to repeat in smaller, fragmented ways. She would slip into brief, terrifying absences. Moments where her eyes remained open, her body moved, but her consciousness seemed gone. Dr. Reynolds began documenting every episode meticulously, as though chronicling a mystery that science had yet to name. The videos were haunting. In one, Emma is seen sitting in a chair during a follow-up appointment, mid-sentence, when her voice suddenly stops. Her gaze freezes. Her breathing slows to a whisper. For 90 seconds, she becomes a statue, eyes vacant, pulse faint. Then, as suddenly as it began, she blinks and continues speaking, unaware that anything had happened. She'd lose time, Dr. Reynolds explained softly. Whole minutes, sometimes hours. It was as if her mind was taking brief trips away from her body. Desperate to find answers, the medical team tried everything. Advanced imaging, experimental neurostimulation, even induced deep sleep therapy designed to reset her neural patterns. None of it worked. The more they intervened, the more fragmented Emma became. Her EEG readings grew stranger. Bursts of synchronized neuron firing that mirrored what's seen at the edge of brain death, followed by moments of hyperactivity that defied normal sleep cycles. Dr. Reynolds recalls the exhaustion that set in, not just for Emma, but for him. I'd sit by her bed, watching her sleep, waiting for something to happen. I kept thinking I could outsmart whatever this was, that if I just stayed long enough, watched closely enough, I'd catch it in the act. Emma herself grew quieter, withdrawn. During one late-night checkup, she turned to him and said, "Every time I fall asleep, I die a little more." Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was matter-of-fact. As if she were describing the weather, those words hit him harder than she could have known. He began questioning everything he believed about sleep, that it was restorative, essential, safe. With Emma, sleep had become something else entirely. A crossing point, a doorway she kept stepping through, only to return more distant each time. Then, one night, it happened again. Daniel found her collapsed on the floor of their living room, eyes open but lifeless. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Her vitals were absent. Pulse, gone. Heartbeat, flatline. The monitor echoed the same impossible pattern from that night in the lab. Dr. Reynolds was called immediately. By the time he arrived, she had been unresponsive for nearly 8 minutes. And then, just like before, she gasped back to life. Her first words to him were quiet, trembling. "You came back too." Dr. Reynolds says that was the moment he realized he was no longer a scientist observing a patient. He was a witness to something his instruments couldn't explain, a phenomenon that mocked every definition of life and death he'd ever trusted. "I thought I understood the boundaries of medicine," he says in the closing voiceover. But watching her collapse again and again, only to return, I understood something else. Maybe those boundaries were never real. In the months that followed, the chaos gradually settled into something even more unsettling. Calm. Emma stopped having her death-like episodes as abruptly as they'd begun. Her vitals stabilized, her tests normalized, and her sleep, though shallow, became predictable again. To the outside world, it looked like recovery. But for Dr. Reynolds, it felt more like the eye of a storm. He continued running tests, looking for any trace of the anomaly that had once defined her charts. None appeared. Her brainwave patterns looked human again, ordinary, boring, measurable. Yet every time he saw her, something in her presence reminded him of that night. Her eyes were softer now, but distant, as though part of her remained in a place no one else could reach. When he asked her how she felt, she smiled faintly. "Different," she said. "Lighter. Like I left something behind." Her words lingered in his mind as he prepared to present her case at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine's annual conference. The auditorium was packed. Colleagues, skeptics, researchers from every major institution. On the screen behind him, he projected the footage. The flat line, the movement, the impossible moment she sat up with no pulse. Gasps rippled through the audience. When the lights came up, hands shot into the air. Some doctors accused him of equipment failure. Others questioned his methodology. A few quietly admitted that what they saw defied logic. One neurologist from Stanford called it artifact interference. Another labeled it psychogenic pseudo-death. But one researcher stood and said simply, "What if she wasn't gone?" That question hung in the air. The press picked up on the story. Headlines dubbed it the Reynolds phenomenon. Dr. Reynolds hated the attention. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing understanding. He spent weeks revisiting the data, desperate to find the one missing variable that could make it make sense. But every time he came close, the truth slipped further away. Emma, meanwhile, seemed almost untouched by the uproar. She agreed to one final interview before disappearing from public view. The camera captured her sitting by a window, soft light framing her face. Her voice was calm, steady. "I'm not afraid to sleep anymore," she said, "because I know it's not the end." Her statement divided the medical community even further. Some called it poetic nonsense. Others whispered privately that maybe, just maybe, consciousness could exist beyond brain function. That perhaps life wasn't just biological, but something far stranger. Dr. Reynolds didn't have answers. He still doesn't. "I only know what I saw," he says in reflection. "I watched a woman die with no brain activity, no pulse, and somehow remain aware. And then I watched her live again." He pauses, voice trembling slightly. "That's not science. That's something else entirely." Years later, long after the case had faded from headlines and conferences, Dr. Michael Reynolds found himself standing once again inside the old sleep lab. The building was quiet now. No humming machines, no flickering monitors, no restless patients waiting for answers. Dust coated the equipment that once captured the most confounding data of his career. The smell of antiseptic had been replaced by the faint scent of old paper and time. He walked slowly past the observation room, his footsteps echoing softly off the tiled floor. The glass window where he once watched Emma Clark hover between life and death was cracked at one corner, a small fracture that had gone unnoticed for years. He stared at it for a long time, remembering the pulse that wasn't there, the moment her eyes opened when every instrument declared she was gone. In interviews recorded years later, his tone is quieter, almost tender. "People ask if I ever solved it," he says. "If I ever figured out how she could die and still be aware. The truth is, no, I didn't. And I'm not sure I ever will." He admits that the case changed everything about how he practices medicine and how he views the human mind. We think of consciousness as data, as electrical signals firing in predictable rhythms. But Emma showed me something different. She showed me that maybe there's a part of us that doesn't turn off when the body does. He steps closer to the old monitor, running his hand along its dusty frame. The last thing it ever recorded, that impossible flat line, still haunts him. Sometimes, he says, he dreams of that screen. The empty line, the silence, the sudden gasp. I used to think sleep was the body's way of healing, he says in a final reflective voiceover. A daily reset, a simple biological necessity. But now, I see it differently. Every night, millions of us close our eyes and vanish into a world that science still can't fully explain. For a few hours, our consciousness fades. Our muscles paralyze. Our awareness disappears. And somehow, we return, as if guided back by something we can't measure. He turns to leave, pausing at the door. Maybe sleep isn't just rest, he says. Maybe it's practice, a rehearsal for something greater, something we all eventually face. Outside, the night sky stretches endless and dark, the same deep blue he remembers from that night years ago. A single monitor light still flickers faintly in the lab behind him, a ghost of data. Pulsing once, then fading into stillness. As his voice grows faint, one last thought lingers, spoken almost like a prayer. Every night, we surrender ourselves to the unknown. And maybe, in that surrender, we touch the edge of what waits beyond. A soft heartbeat echoes. Once, then silence.